Hello, my name is Richard. Thank you very much for watching this video presentation. My talk is about the loss of subject-verb inversion after the main clause adverb then. The change is illustrated in examples 1 and 2. And then thought ich gan away to sleepen. And then thought I to go away to sleep. This is from the Green rule, so let's say circa 1215. Here, the verb in blue comes immediately after the adverb in red, followed by the subject in green. Then I returned into the hall. This sentence is from 1698 and it has the modern English word order. First the adverb in red, followed by subject plus verb in green and blue. So there is a gradual loss of subject-verb inversion after then. How has this change developed during the history of English? Bacon 2000 found that inversion dropped from 36% in about 1500 to 2% in 1600. Similar numbers were presented by Leiden in 1997. She saw a decline from 40 to 12% between 1420 and 1710 in the Helsinki corpus, and from 30 to 12% between the 16th and 17th centuries in her corpus of early English correspondences. In my own work, illustrated with the figure that you can see here, I have collected the relevant data between 1000 and 1500 from the pen-passed corpora, and extrapolating from my model, I estimated 53% inversion in 1500, dropping to 18% in 1700. Two aspects of this change are particularly remarkable. Firstly, it is exceptionally slow. It takes about 750 years from 1000 to 1750 for this change to be executed, by which I mean a decline from 99 to 1% of inversion. This is far slower than most other changes that I have seen. Secondly, and related to the first point, there is an extraordinary amount of variation during the transitional period. For example, in this graph here, every dot represents a text with the size of the dot proportional to the number of examples it contains. And as you can see, around 1400, you find texts everywhere in the range from 0 to 100%. So the variability is quite extreme, as shown by the time parameter, so the fitted line, with its very wide confidence intervals, and the model doesn't fit very well. All of this suggests that there are important determinants apart from time that constrain the variation. Therefore, the main goal of this research is to identify the most important factors in the loss of inversion after then, and to construct a well-motivated multi-factorial model for the development. Specifically, I looked at the variables dialect, verb type, several subject properties, subject positions, and overall inversion rates. Furthermore, I would like to relate the change to the general decline in verb second in Middle English. A lot more is known about the factors that influence the decline in verb second, and here one should mention work by Van Kemenade, Warner and Heberle, and the question is whether these factors are the same as for the decline of inversion after then, or if they are different. This is important in particular for a theory of subject positions in medieval English, but I won't talk about that today. It is also important to take the rise of subject auxiliary inversion into account. So from the 16th century on, the general option for subject-verb inversion gave way to a more restricted system of only subject auxiliary inversion. And so this restriction to auxiliaries as the only category that can invert obviously influences any discussion of more specific subtypes of inversion. All of this is still work in progress. I haven't decided on the final model that I would like to propose yet, and so for reasons of time I will only present some of the most interesting findings here. Before I present some of the results, let me first say a few words about the textual data that I'm using for this research. The material mainly comes from the pen-passed corpus of Middle English, PPC ME2. In addition, I collected data from my very own past corpus of Middle English poetry, the PC MEP. It is annotated according to the same guidelines as the pen-passed corpora, has more than 200,000 word tokens now, and focuses on texts composed between 1200 and 1400. So, shameless plug, if you think you might benefit from some additional syntactically passed Middle English texts, check out the corpus homepage at www.pcmep.net. I keep adding new texts. The last text I passed is The Siege of Jerusalem from about 1380, so feel free to check back in every now and then, and I hope that lots of people will find this resource useful. Moreover, I'm currently in the process of compiling another dataset, a corpus of late medieval prose romances. Some of those texts are included in the standard corpora, like the Helsinki corpus or the Innsbruck corpus of Middle English prose, but actually most texts are not. So some of those texts are studied here for the very first time in the context of diachronic syntax. All the romances I have already digitized are listed here, totaling more than 1.3 million words. Some of the highlights include the first digitization, as far as I know, of Mallory's work from the original Winchester manuscript, Caxton's Recueil, the first book printed in the English language, and at the moment I'm working on another great text called Arthur of Little Britain. I'm having a lot of fun with this project, and I hope that I can use it for lots of interesting studies in the future. All in all, I have collected almost 10,000 examples of adverbial then, and they are split quite evenly between cases with and without inversion. But I'm still collecting more examples from these prose romances I just mentioned. So that's a short overview over the databases. Alright, I will now summarize some of the results. As it turns out, the most important variable predicting inversion after then, apart from time, is subject type. This is based on a variable importance plot from a random forest. Subject pronouns are very unlikely to invert, as in 3. Then he commanded that he should went home to his fellows. Here we have a subject pronoun, he, and the verb is not inverted. Full subjects are far more likely to occur with subject-verb inversion, as in example 4. And then commanded Alexander that they should make many fires outside of the army. Alexander is a full noun phrase subject, and it comes after the finite verb. This is a near minimal pair taken from the same text, one of the prose romances I've investigated. The problem is that other variables are highly correlated with subject type. The decline of verb second has been argued to be influenced by information structure, and that may well be the underlying reason here as well. Subject pronouns are virtually always old, whereas full noun phrases may be discourse new. Based on manual coding of 300 examples for information status, I did not find a better fit for information structure over subject type. So I'm wondering if I should really invest the substantial time needed to look at the context of every example to annotate them for their discourse status. I did find a significant difference between definite and indefinite noun phrases, which may suggest a difference between new and old information, but the effect is not very strong. Furthermore, weight is an important factor. As with information status, there is collinearity here. Subject pronouns are always light, whereas full noun phrases tend to be longer. And once a subject becomes very heavy, which means more than 35 characters or 8 words, weight strongly correlates with subject position, as shown in Warner 2006. So, to some degree, weight must be an independent factor, but it is also related to the other two. In short, it is difficult to decide which factor actually has explanatory power, subject type, information status, or weight, and the relationship between them is complicated. At the moment, my best model only includes the difference between pronominal versus nominal subjects, but I find that quite non-explanatory and unsatisfactory. What I would like to do instead is to develop a more profound theory that unifies the effect of subject type, weight, and information status under a pragmatic explanation. Britta Warwick has produced a lot of relevant scholarship in this respect. She interprets tha and thonne in Middle English in terms of narrative markers, linkers, stylistic effect, and so on, and it is possible that these interpretations can explain why subject properties influence the variation. Here I show a related modern English example from EK and Leiden 2011. When you talk about the arrangement of a railway train, you can say, the engine comes first, then come the train cars. But it is strange to continue this sentence as, the engine comes first, then the train cars come. Note that the difference in judgment goes hand in hand with the relative focalization and heaviness of a non-pronominal subject. There is a certain inelegant lack of weight at the end of the sentence in 5b. It's just the verb come after a relatively heavy subject. The idea would be that then plus subject verb might tend to be interpreted literally as a temporal sequence with possible paraphrases as next or subsequently. Sentence 5b would receive the interpretation that first something happened and afterwards train cars arrived. Then, followed by subject-verb inversion, on the other hand, has more figurative interpretations. The structure is used for narrative effect, as in Warwick's work, perhaps for attention or surprise, meaning something like behold, and other non-literal interpretations. So in 5a, comes does not literally mean arrive, but rather next follow the train cars. Obviously, this is not a full explanation yet, but it gives an idea of how I would like to subsume the subject properties under a pragmatic account. Verb type is another factor that influences inversion. The strongest effect comes from verbs of saying, such as say, answer, quoth, speak, etc. Contrasting sentences like 6a, then said the knight, with 6b, then the king said, shows elevated rates of inversion in comparison to other verb types. This is a striking difference to the general decline in verb second, where verbs of saying do not play a role, and it is also an effect that persists to some degree all the way to present-day English. Unaccusative contexts are also important, such as verbs of movement, then arose a cry, raising, then began great sorrow and hunger in the city, and passives, then were the ditches made. However, this effect is much weaker than I expected, because unaccusatives are strong determinants for verb second environments, but they are barely significant in my data. This shows that it is important to distinguish between the general decline in verb second and the decline of inversion after then. The observation also further strengthens the assumption that there were non-trivial pragmatic differences between subject-verb and verb-subject orders. I would like to make two more remarks. Firstly, I could not find any evidence that the change mirrors the trajectory of general verb second. Consider sentence 10, and thus the common understanding should we always hold. Such structures with a fronted topic, then the verb, and then a subject pronoun were virtually non-existent in the Old English West Saxon dialect, but during the course of Middle English they begin to appear before they fall again from 1400 in line with the restriction of inversion to auxiliaries. This is illustrated in this figure here. You can see the rise and fall of verb second with pronominal subjects. However, this diachronic development cannot be found in my data on inversion after then. This has interesting consequences for the structural analysis of these patterns, in particular, like I said earlier, for the syntax of subjects. The second point is that romances are overall less likely to show inverted verbs than the texts in the pen corpus. This is the opposite of what one might expect if inversion were primarily used as a narrative structuring device. Perhaps we see here the influence from French because most romances are based on French source materials. This is all I have time for in this video, so I will now conclude. In this video, I presented some predictors for inversion after the main clause adverb then. I showed that the development is different from the general decline in verb second, both in terms of the time course and in terms of their constraining factors. The change is unusually slow. One could perhaps account for this as follows. An ordinary replacement change, in which two variants are largely synonymous, result in relatively fast substitution. If two forms are semantically specialized, then there will be no change at all, but stable variation. But there may be cases in between those two extremes where variants are weakly differentiated, and the loss of inversion after then may be one example. The onomasiological range of the two variants only partially overlaps, and therefore the transitional period becomes longer and variance higher. From this perspective, the long, drawn-out nature of the change in word order after then would be explained as a consequence of differences in pragmatic inferences or co-occurrence patterns. I hope you found this case study interesting. Thanks again for listening, and I am looking forward to your comments and questions.